we can get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Kira, incoming president of SHIP, for those of you that may not know. And today we're going to be talking about entrepreneurship, and Matheus will be hosting this session. And the way it's going to work is we'll prompt him with some questions, and he'll speak about his experiences and answer them to the best of his ability. And at the end, about 10 to 15 minutes left, we'll answer some of your questions if you have any. And if we don't get to them, we will potentially have another series that will address them. So I'd like to have Matheus introduce himself because he can probably speak better to himself than I can. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm currently a second-year master's student studying biomechanics. Initially, my first year, I spent doing biomedical devices, but then I realized that FDA regulations is actually quite tedious and quite annoying. So I realized I was like, I need to switch over to something that's more exciting, which is biomechanics for me. And so born in Brazil, came to the United States when I was 4, and have lived here in the Boston area ever since. And yeah, I guess like a good question that you might be asking is like, why should I even listen to him in the first place? Like, why does his information that he's giving me, why does it even matter? And so I guess my way that I would respond to that would be that recently in January of this year, I did a 2.5-week course, crash course on entrepreneurship at MIT, part of this course called Start MIT. And so basically they taught us from 9 a.m. until like 3:30 in the afternoon, and taught us like everything that has to do with entrepreneurship, talked about like venture capitalists, talked about and some of the bigger concepts that involve like team building and different things like that. And so on top of that, I also did, I took this literally it was basically like, how do you create a startup business plan from start to finish? And so I took this course at the MIT Sloan Business School this past spring semester, on top of the other stuff that I was doing for school. And so I literally took this class and was taught by the guy that wrote the book on entrepreneurship at MIT. And so hopefully that can give you a little bit of context on like why my opinion matters. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of context on like what the information that I'm providing you with, like where that comes from, because I know that there's a lot of things online that you can search and try to get more information on. But hopefully this can give you a different perspective, at least from the entrepreneurship perspective of my own.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you. So like I said, at the end, last 10 to 15 minutes, we can answer questions. But as we go, I encourage you to put any questions that you think of into the chat, and then we'll take a look at them from then on. If not, then you can just wait till the end to populate those. So to get started, first question, what or who first inspired you to dive into entrepreneurship?
So I guess a good place to start even before that would be like, what is entrepreneurship, or what does it mean to be like an entrepreneur? And a really good definition that I found from this guy at MIT was that an entrepreneur is a new venture that produces a new product or service that creates a value to users and then captures that value and then makes it economically viable to create a business around it. And so that can be applied to a series of different things. A good place, like I should also like mention that the perspective that I'm bringing into this is like there are like two different ways that you can identify like a startup or a company. There would be like a small medium enterprise which focuses like solely on like local markets. So that would be like your cleaners like across the street, or like that Venezuelan restaurant across the street that you go to. But then on the other side, there's this thing called innovation-driven markets or enterprises, and that's focuses solely on like global markets. So I'm specifically coming from a perspective of like global markets, so that you can create like a larger business that can address like a series of different issues that people have. Um, but from my perspective, in terms of like entrepreneurship as a whole, would be like for my parents, because my mom works as a house, like has her own house cleaning business, and my dad works as a handyman, doing whatever he can get his hands on. So I've always been around it. So it's not like is not something that is uncommon to me. But I think that um, like similar to the default answer that a majority of people would give when they are asked like, what makes you um, want to do entrepreneurship, and the default answer has always been, well, if I don't create this, then nobody else will. And so like that's sort of like what actually drove me to do, or to start going down the entrepreneurship route, because I'm like, hey, I have this idea, and I know that if I don't do it, then nobody else will. So that's sort of like what drove me down this road in the first place.
Sweet. So next question would be, what would you say is the biggest challenge an entrepreneur usually faces? And this challenge has to be something that will determine if he or she comes out on top successfully or not. So something major.
The biggest thing that an entrepreneur has to consider is like a paying customer. If you don't have someone that will pay for your goods and services, then you're not even going to get off the ground. So you need to have someone that is willing to take their hard-earned money and be like, hey, this is something that is of value to me, and this is something that is going to benefit me in some way, shape, or form. So definitely number one priority would be finding a paying customer, like just to start.
Okay, next question. What would you consider to be your biggest failure thus far in entrepreneurship? And how did that failure mold your future?
So last year, I guess I can speak to a little bit of like where I am now. So my startup idea would be to create a wearable technology that analyzes like how people move, and then gives them recommendations on on the things that they can do better. And so I was working on this. I had originally proposed this idea to a buddy of mine in February of last year, and it was in very, very early stages. And I realized that after working on it for a few months and like meeting with him like pretty often, um, that I was doing a lot more work than he was. And as we both went on co-op in the fall of last year, and I realized that like I had put in most of the work in, and that he was just sort of like very leisurely caring for it. So I was like, you know what, this is not going to be something that's sustainable. And I realized I was like, I need to try to figure out, it's probably best if we just like go our separate ways. And so like he's going to do his PhD right now in wearable technology at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, I think, somewhere down south. And like him and I are still good friends, but I know that you could have the right person at the wrong time. And at least that was the case for me. He just wasn't ready to commit to something that could have potentially been long-term. And that's okay. Like, I think that oftentimes that would be, that's something that people have to find themselves in. It's like, hey, sometimes it's not the right opportunity. It's not the right time for a person to start working at a startup. So you have to be in like it's like, you have to find the right person at the right time when the market's right. So a lot of things, like almost like the stars have to align in order for you to get your thing up and running.
Awesome. What is the one character trait that you feel distinguishes a hopeful entrepreneur from a realized entrepreneur?
So there's the guy that taught the class that I took at MIT. His name is Bill Aulette, and his thing like is anti-fragility. So a person has to be anti-fragile. And what does that mean? It means that if a person is anti-fragile, then when setbacks and like circumstances and like frustrations come, then that person is willing to like continue to like persevere and continue to push forward, even though it is difficult. Because at the end of the day, like every single startup, every single entrepreneur is going to have setbacks. And what you do when those setbacks happen is like what's most important. Like if you continue to push forward and continue forward with your venture, then that's just going to make you even more resilient. So anti-fragility would be taking it from another person that's much wiser than I am. I would say that anti-fragility would be like the number one thing.
Now, in that same light, what are the most important qualities that someone needs to develop in order to become a successful entrepreneur?
So it depends on what exactly that they're trying to do, right? So like if you're trying to create a startup that is like very technically heavy, so if you're trying to create another like iPhone, which I'm hoping that you're not, because that would be very difficult considering all the people that are already on the market. But if you're trying to create a startup, then like if your idea is to create a wind turbine that is like 75% more efficient than the current wind turbine that's in the market, then you would have to have like understanding of like CFD, so computational fluid dynamics. You'd have to have understanding of how do you like build this thing in the first place? How do you manufacture it? How do you analyze whether or not it's actually doing what it says it's doing? And how do you produce like results that say like, hey, this is actually doing what I said it's going to do? So I think like the first thing is like, hey, if this is something that is like even software as a software as a service, which is called SaaS, you have to be technically competent to like build the network that's going to be used to like sell this to people. So definitely like being able to be technically competent, but also understand like how do you analyze the market? Like, is there an actual need for this? Does this need is this need limited to just 5 people, or is it also important for another 200 people? You know, so it's like it's trying to figure out all those things, and like you need to have to develop like slowly all these different traits to essentially make like a good entrepreneur. And I would say that a lot of engineers also don't have like any sales experience, but that is like, let's say you create a perfect product, like it just like it's a rock star product. It also has to be, you also have to be able to sell that to people. And a lot of people don't know is like Apple, Google, Amazon, like they are selling their services to businesses as well. So if you need to have like, it is good for you to have some sort of like sales experience or like marketing experience to be able to like get your product out and also be able to like sell it to your consumers that are going to allow your business to stay afloat, you know?
Yeah, you don't want to reinvent the wheel if it doesn't need to be reinvented. What are the benefits of being an entrepreneur rather than working for somebody else or having a boss? And what are some disadvantages?
I guess from my own perspective, I think that like the thing that's cool about about being my own entrepreneur would be you have your own idea that you know that nobody else is working on, and you're like, I think that this is really really cool, and be able to just like learn more about that topic or that idea, and being able to create something that actually helps people. Because at least from my perspective, it's okay, it's great and all for you to create like some type of technology that can like that can get some type of revenue, but there has to be like, is this helping this person? Like, is this solving a problem? And so like to me, it's it's great to be able to think about like, hey, if I create this product, then this is going to actually solve a person's problems. And to me, that's exciting. But on the flip side, I think that some of the challenges that come with like being your own like boss and being an entrepreneur is like, it's very tough. Like nobody, like you are paying your own bills. Like you have to go out and you have to do your own market research. You have to talk to a lot of people, and like for different people that's uncomfortable, but for others it's actually like beneficial, and it's easier. So it's like it includes a wide range of different things.
So what are some misconceptions that people have about being an entrepreneur?
I think that, so this is from like, I should also add that this is like the guy at MIT that wrote like the book. His name is Bill Ollett, and like the book is called Disciplined Entrepreneurship. So like one of the things that he talks about in the very beginning is like the fact that people think that if you are a startup or if you're trying to create a venture, that it is an individual that starts a company. And that's not correct, because like statistics show that investors aren't willing to invest in a single founder company. And statistics also show that when you have more people that are the founders of your company, then your odds of succeeding are that much higher, because they are able to see all your blind spots that you don't know that you have, but that everybody has. And so like the other thing that I would also mention too is that, and sometimes people tend to think that like people are born entrepreneurs and some aren't. And what he argues, and that I also agree with, is that like anybody can be made into an entrepreneur. It just, for some people it's easier and for some people it's harder. But I think that whether you work in academics, whether or not you work in as a teacher, whether or not you work as like a plumber, like anybody can be an entrepreneur. It's just a matter of like, do you have a paying customer, and do you have a problem that you are solving for a said paying customer? Like those are the essentials. And so those are at least like a few things that people generally don't know about entrepreneurship.
If you had to make a single change to the landscape of business to help more young people develop entrepreneurial lifestyles, become entrepreneurs, what would that one change be and why?
I think it would be helpful, at least like for you guys, because I would assume that a majority of you guys are undergrads. It would be for you guys to like understand like how difficult it is for you to get a job like post graduation. If you knew how hard that it is to get a job, like this is just like in general, this is like pre-COVID, like it is incredibly difficult to get a job. Northeastern makes it great because of the fact that you get like industry experience, and that you are able to go on a co-op, and you can gain a lot of insight that a lot of people wouldn't have. But the problem with that is like once it comes down to the wire and you're like trying to search for a job, it's actually relatively difficult. And a majority of people that find jobs, like 80% of them, this is like through the Northeastern what's called co-op program, like they literally teach us that 80% of people find jobs through people that they already know. And so like it is very like, that would be one thing that I would like instill in the heads of people that want to be entrepreneurs. Like this, if you know that by the time that you graduate, that you could potentially not have a job, like how hard would you work like from freshman year to senior year? And if you're working that hard knowing that you're not going to have a job, that your likelihood of getting a job is very low, how much harder would you work if you're an entrepreneur and you're like, I don't have any security post graduation, and I need to have people, to find customers that can buy this product and that can keep me like sustained and allow my business to grow. So like there's a difference between like knowing that and like knowing that and like feeling the weight of that. So there's nothing like institutional that I would change. It'd be like changing like the mindset of people. I mean, like, hey, it's actually very hard to like even get a job post graduation, let alone like create your own business. So that would be like a good place to start.
Now, kind of expanding on that, what is the biggest hurdle that an entrepreneur needs to overcome?
To me, it would be the idea that being an entrepreneur is easy. So like I mentioned this before, but like getting into like the details of it now, like a startup consists of like 4 different components, which would be like 50% would be just involving the team. So like just to start off, 50% of your startup is just your team. 35% of that would be execution of whatever you're saying that you're solving. 15% of that would be like the market, and then 5% would be the idea. So a majority of people like they think that like, oh, if I have this genius idea, it will pay for itself. And like it is not the case at all, because you need to have the right people around you that can provide you with that understanding of like how you can execute that, considering the market. And so on top of that, like a majority of like startups fail. Like a majority of startups, they actually don't end up succeeding. And the ones that are able to get like an IPO, which would be initial public offering, and like have like sell stocks and stuff, like those that do succeed, the people that are the investors in said company, they are actually like the ones that are making most of the money. Like most founders don't actually make a lot of money when they go to a public offering, because of the fact that it's diluted so much, and like the investors are the one that gets first dibs on like whatever money that is gained. So like that would be not to crush your hopes and dreams, but also if you're not willing to, this is something that like when I took this course in the beginning of January, if you're not, they explained to us that if you're not willing to interview at least 100 people as part of your startup, then you're going down the wrong career path. And like that sinking feeling that you feel in your stomach, and you're like, that sounds like a lot of people. That feeling is like very real, you know? And I would imagine that a lot of you guys, because this is like part of SHIP, a lot of you guys are doing like something that's related to STEM and specifically related to engineering. And so like you, as well as anybody else, know that there are these things called filter courses. And so like they would be calculus 2, they would be like physics 2, like thermodynamics, and like for different types of physics, I mean for different types of engineering, it would be different things. But for me, when I was sitting in this classroom like with 100 plus people that were trying to get more information on like being an entrepreneur, you can sense that like sinking feeling that everybody was like, wait a second, that's a lot. Like that is actually a lot of people. But if you're like determined to pursue like said idea, then you're undeterred. Like you like that. For me personally, like after the initial shock of I have to interview 100 people, like after that like had passed, I was like, I am that much more sure that I'm going to like go after this, because like to me, if 100 is like the number to start off, then like I could probably do that. You know, it's hard, but it's something that's doable. You know, like other people have done that. And so if other people have done it, it's like, who am I to not be able to do it, you know?
So we just got a question in the chat. What type of people would you be looking for? What would be the priority? And besides people with the same core values and or expertise field.
And when you say like, what type of people would I be looking for in terms of like, what do you mean?
I assume partners.
I think that where I personally am right now, it would be trying to find people that have like electrical engineering experience or expertise to create a technology that, like, using accelerometers and trying to figure out a way to um, make it waterproof so that people can be like use this these sensors on their body, like while they're running, while they're exercising and doing different things. um, because like I am working and I know like sort of where my gaps are, and that would, I think, would be the gap that I haven't necessarily filled yet. um, does that answer your question?
I'm going to take that as a yes. um, do you have any strategies that help you think outside of the box for new ideas?
I think the best way to, like, to answer that question would be like um, just like look around you. It's like what problems do you have that you're like, I need to solve this. um, so like someone at some point thought, man, my nose is very runny. Like I need to try to figure out a way to like blow my nose or to like get rid of the snot that's inside my nose and like keep my hands clean. And so they came out with a tissue, and like it was a genius idea. And the same thing with like uh, you're walking down the streets of Boston. It's the middle of the winter, and you have this Arctic tundra that you're in, and you're getting enveloped by wind, and you're like, your lips are chapped, and you're like, man, I wish that I had something that could keep my lips moist. And then they came out with the chapstick. And so like there are little things like that. That's like you have a problem that you're trying to solve, and you're trying to solve it in a way that people will enjoy. So I'll give the example of I've actually like had to did brief research on this in preparation for this, and there's this company that you can actually Google yourself. It's called Potato Parcel, and I don't know if you remember what this was, but it was literally like this guy created a way to send messages on a potato and like send it out to people. I kid you not, they have made, at least from what I found, they have made over $700,000 off of writing things on potatoes and selling it and sending it to people. So they actually, the one of the founders, like what he did is he found a way to like print thing like images on said potatoes, and they sent it out to like NBA players, like 150 NBA players. And these guys were, and like they posted on like Twitter and whatever else that they use, and like their reactions were hilarious because they're like, whoever this person is that sent me this potato, thank you. And like there's a need for it, you know. um but you don't know until you're like, hey, I have this problem, and I have never had the problem of needing a potato but that has some type of message on it, but someone's out there found that that was a problem, and they were like, this is a good idea. And so I don't know how sustainable that is. However, people paid for it, and so you know that at least like that is a need that exists. So yeah, I would like, sorry if that was like an extreme example, but I think that it would be a good place to start would be like, hey, just look around, you're like, what problems are you trying to solve? Like my water keeps getting warm. How can I keep my water from getting warm? Let me create some type of like very insulated water bottle that can be used to like keep my water cold. And then they created like all these different companies that I'm not going to list, you know?
Awesome example. And I think you gave the first step, but what steps can a college student with an idea for a business or a product take to make it into an actual thing?
I think a good place to start would be like, you have said idea. You need to evaluate whether or not that's a good idea. And so you may or may not remember that there's this cartoon called Dragon Ball Z. And what it did is like there's this one scene where they have one of the main characters and he's in this thing called the hyperbolic time chamber, and he's like trying to strengthen himself. And he's essentially in a vacuum and just training. So what you don't want to do is be in a vacuum and just like, I have the most brilliant idea in the whole wide world, and I'm going to keep this to myself, because if anybody knows about this, then they're going to take my idea. It's like the exact opposite is true. Like you want to like evaluate whether your idea is a good idea or not by like talking to people that would actually like buy whatever you're trying to sell. So if you have this pen that whose ink it immediately becomes dry, like as soon as you like write a line, then you want to target people that use pens. So that would be like office buildings and like people that work like I don't know, like lawyer offices and different things like that. Like you want to target these people and you want to ask these people like, hey, is this a problem that you have? Because what you don't want to do is spend your own hard-earned money and try to pursue this idea when nobody's willing to pay for it. Like that's a big mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make, is that they try to solve a problem. Excuse me, and they create a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. And so like the first place to start would be like, am I solving a problem? And like, is my idea, the way that I'm choosing to solve that problem, is that something that people are willing to buy or pay for? And so like outside from that, like Northeastern has like tons of like really valuable resources that can be used to like equip you guys and provide you guys with like a better understanding of um, how you create your startup, how you get funding, because a lot of schools unfortunately like don't have that luxury, you know. um, like they have, idea would be the first place that I would start if you're trying to like consider like doing your own startup. Like idea, the actual like on school accelerator at Northeastern, that would be a great place to start, because that they can provide you with like guidance and mentorship to try to better understand like how do you solve that problem, like what's your target audience and different things like that.
So essentially, if you have a good idea or something that you deem is a good idea, and you want to understand from others if that is termed a good idea, how often or how in general do you look for feedback or criticism?
Sorry, you like cut off like right towards the end when you were about to ask your question.
Oh, good. How often do you look for feedback or criticism?
Oh, I look for it all the time. I have to. Like I have so many blind spots that like if I don't fill it with like some type of like response, then I know that I'm not going to be successful. So like even before this, I was like talking to a buddy of mine to try to get an understanding of like, hey, like trying to get her perspective on this like subsection to my idea. And she provided me with like some great feedback. However, I should note that um, the last people that you should be talking to about your idea would be like family and friends, because they're going to want to support you. Like they don't want to be like, that's a terrible idea, actually. Like nobody's going to buy that. Like the likelihood of, I would hope that the likelihood of your mom saying that like you have a terrible idea and that you shouldn't go after that, I would hope that it would be low. But you know, I don't know what your relationship is with your parents. So if they're really honest, that's great. But if they're not, then like um, all of that to say that I would definitely suggest you talk to people that would be like your customers, um, mainly because like they would provide you with the most like raw and like it's like no, it's like you get input from people that are not your friends and family, because you're going to actually learn from that, you know?
All right, you cut off a little bit towards the end, but I think we got it. And hey, you could have that one parent, right, that beats you around the bush, and that one parent that supports you no matter what. So how important is it to be well connected in general when it comes to developing your ideas and evaluating them?
That's like, I think that from my perspective, I think like to start off, it depends on like what your idea is. So like if you when you're trying to figure out like how you logistically like create said create said execution, like create said products, sorry, um you need to go out of your way and you need to like talk to people and try to figure out like, hey, how would I go about doing this? If I'm creating a pen that that has ink that dries instantly, how do I create that thing? Like you need to create the liquid, which is the most important part, but then you have to create the housing, and then you have to create the different components, and you have to manufacture it. And so in order to do that, you need to like actually reach out to like different people in your network, whether that be professors, whether that be your dad's employer or whoever that may be, so you can try to figure out like ways to logistically like create said thing. So it's incredibly important. Like, and being from Northeastern, you're provided with a lot of resources because like Northeastern is a well-respected school. You know, it's not like some second grade school in the middle of nowhere. Like this is a school that's in the middle of Boston, surrounded by a lot of different universities, and like all you have to do is literally say, "Hey, I'm a Northeastern student. I was wondering if I could ask you questions about X, Y, and Z." And like you'd be surprised like how willing people are to answer questions. But sometimes you just have to pester them and continue to ask and continue to ask and continue to ask until they respond. And then they will tell you to stop, or they will say, yes, I'm willing to answer your questions, you know?
Okay, so you definitely stress the importance of staying connected and all that, but how important are mentors and surrounding yourself by like-minded people in this area of entrepreneurship?
I would say that's very, very essential because like similar to um, like talking to different people, talking to different customers and getting their perspective, it's also incredibly important to have people that have done and have been an entrepreneur, and that can be like, hey, you should potentially consider this from a different perspective, like, or maybe, hey, you're spending a lot of time on this one part that isn't necessarily the most important thing right now, that you should worry about in like 2 months. So like I think that it's helpful to like have mentors that can sort of like guide you down the right road. And because as you, let's say going back to the pen example that I'm going to exhaust, if you're trying to create this pen, you're going to be like, oh man, what if it's transparent, or it has to have a black casing, or it has to have the ability to shoot rockets? Like, I don't know. These mentors are going to guide you back down the right path and be like, hey, maybe the rockets isn't essential. You know, maybe you should have focused your energy on something else. So like it's little things like that that help, that mentors like help to paint a different perspective. And it's always like it's always good feedback. Like I think that if you're a person that takes like entrepreneurship seriously, like you should seek after feedback, whether it be like, because sometimes it sucks. Like sometimes it sucks to hear that you're wrong, or it sucks to hear that maybe the way that you're doing it is not right. Like that's not a comfortable feeling, but it's like it is better that that person tells you that rather than you working on it for a long period of time and then you're like, man, I wish that someone had told me that. So like that's their job. Like their job is to equip you and to like fill all the gaps in your knowledge and your understanding, you know?
what resources should an entrepreneur look for, and how can they use those effectively?
I think that it would, in terms of resources, it really depends on like what exactly you need. So like, is it someone to explain to you what an entrepreneur is? Is it someone to explain to you what are the steps that you need to take to create a business plan? Is it like how do you market your product? Like it depends on where the person is in their stage of like development, and it depends on like whether or not they're still trying to think through their idea. So um, could you clarify the question? What do you mean by
Yeah,
resources?
for sure. So, like for example, you plugged Idea, the accelerator. There are also resources, right? Generate, Scout, like the different needs, I guess. What would you kind of recommend for each need or critical need, I would say?
I think that the resource that I've found like the most helpful has been like the book that I mentioned, which is Disciplined Entrepreneurship by Bill Owlett. Like it gives you a very like no nonsense like step by step guide to create a startup. So it is very clear, concise, has pictures, so it's not all words. And the pictures help to convey the idea. So disciplined entrepreneurship would be a really good one. Um, if you're trying to answer the question of how do I know whether or not an Amazon will take my idea and just run with it? A really good movie that you could watch is this movie called Silicon Cowboys, which talks about this company called Compaq and how they went one-on-one against this company called IBM, which you may or may not have heard of. I'm hoping that you have, seen as your engineers. Like I would look into Silicon Cowboys as well. And then if you're trying to answer the question on whether or not, like once you have, let's say you have the team, you have the execution down, and you have the right idea, and you're trying to answer the question on like what happens when you put all those things together, but the market isn't there, then a really, really good movie that I would also recommend looking into is this movie called General Magic. And so um, just to give you a brief blurb on that, they essentially came out with the iPhone in the 1980s. So like they came out with the iPhone long before Steve Jobs had ever like conceptually thought of the iPhone, which is crazy. But yeah, if you're trying to look on like what happens if the market isn't ready for said technology, then General Magic would be a really good resource as well.
Okay, I think this is a good transition point to open it up to people that have additional questions that we didn't touch on. And if you want to just populate those in the chat, we can go from there and start answering them. And then if not, we can proceed with a couple more questions that we have left.
Cool.
By all means, you guys can unmute and speak up as well.
I have a question.
Let's go.
Hi, Matheus. Thank you for taking the time. So you mentioned like partnering and finding the right people to help you execute your idea. Now, how do you sell people on your idea to begin with to get them on board with you starting your idea?
Are you passionate about it? Are you excited about like your idea? You know, like you have to you have to sell them on you first and foremost, because they're going to be stuck with you for a very long time. Like they're going to be stuck with you, let's say like 8, 9 hours, 10 hours out of the day, if you guys decide to go after this thing. So like you have to be able to like sell yourself and be like, hey, I'm a great human being, you should be around me more often. Actually, I wouldn't do that. Don't do that. I think it would start off by like selling yourself, you know, like, hey, telling them how passionate you are about said thing, tell them about all the research that you've already done that explains like why this would be a good idea and why this is gonna work. I think that people want to see that you've done your due diligence and that you've done the work, like the groundwork to get this thing up and running. You know, if they see that you haven't and that you're just like, oh yeah, I mean, I've heard of this thing and I've like Googled this thing once or twice, like they don't want to hear that. Like if you're serious about it and you want to have all the information that you need so that you can present this like kick-ass presentation being like, hey, this is a great idea and you're gonna love it. Like these are that would be the best way to start, I think. But there are other ways. That would be just like off the top of my head a way that you can go about doing it. Definitely sell yourself first though.
All right. Thank you.
I have a question, Matheus. What would you say, or what would you recommend for embracing loss, embracing failure? Like, what would you say is a good practice, or like a skill to practice to embrace failure?
It's gonna happen. Like you're going to fail. If you haven't failed before, that's pretty impressive. Like hats off to you, but you are going to fail. And I think that like the sooner that you come to terms with the fact that you will fail at some point or another, the better off you will be. Because like at the end of the day, you want to be a person that can accept failure because it's going to happen whether you like it or not. But I think that's like in terms of like preparing yourself for it, I think a good thing to do would be like I said, getting the perspective of different people, because if you get the perspective of different people, then they will tell you some things that you should consider that you didn't consider, and that will prevent the failure to like said failures or said obstacles to a certain extent. But not everything can be prevented. Like any startup company, any company period, has experienced failures and different challenges. And it's just like it's bound to happen at one point or another. And I think that the way that you react to it is probably best, like to think through, you know. Hopefully that answers your question.
I have a question. So, like, in terms of like you doing your research, besides talking to people and asking them and you getting your feedback, what resources would you like suggest? Besides going online, perhaps I'm talking maybe a blog in specific or something like that. Because it happened to me that I had an idea, I Google it, there's nothing there, so I know there's a gap in the market for that, but I don't know where to go from there. Besides talking to people there, telling me there is this and that, what else would you recommend?
So the way you explained it, you have an idea, you've researched it, and it appears that nobody has thought about said idea yet. This is not what you're going to want to hear, but I would go back and try to find people that are doing something similar to your idea, because nobody is creating the wheel, you know, like nobody is creating something that has never existed before. There are people out there that have created whatever you're trying to create, and they might be approaching it a different way. And so like it's important for you to like really dig into, and like maybe even like the key terms that you are using or the keywords that you are using where can be like changed into like be slightly different. The last thing that you want to do is like go to a group of investors and being like, hey, I have this really great idea and I know that nobody else has worked on it, and then being like, that is impossible because your idea is not new, and then them having like listing all your competitors and being like, these top 5 people right here are already doing what you're doing. And the reason why I say that is because like last year I sort of like it was in a similar space where I was just like, man, there are only like 2 or 3 people doing this. And then all of a sudden when I took a step back and I evaluated like the way that different people approaching doing said, which would be performance optimization, that's when I was like, oh shoot, I kid you not, there is like 15 plus people or companies that are doing that in some way, shape, or form. You know, like it's very unlikely that you're the first person to come up with a brand new idea that nobody has ever created before. So I would take some more time and being like, take the next week, take the next weeks, and like spend like, let's say 2 or 3 hours in a day and like really dig into it, use different keywords, and to try to think of or find these companies, because they definitely exist. I can guarantee to you that they exist. And that's like one of the first things that the accelerator, that they ask you about. They're like, who are your competitors? And like, if you say that you have no competitors, they're gonna be like, yeah, that's not true. So it's not what you wanted to hear, Josue, but it's, unfortunately, it is the case. There's definitely someone out there that has thought about your way to a certain extent, but not approaching it the same way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like you said, like the criticism is the best thing. So the more I get that, the better. Thank you.
Hi, Matheus. Just wanted to ask more about where you are in the process with your product, because I feel like it's going to be pretty cool to learn about like what steps you took at the beginning and then to get to where you are right now.
Right now I'm doing what's called primary market research. Primary market research is when you are literally interviewing people like one-on-one. I'm literally like setting up interviews throughout the week and talking to customers or potential customers and being like, hey, what do you want to know? Like, what are the metrics that you're looking for? What is the problem that you have? And hopefully the problem that they have, you can solve. Because it's possible that they may have a problem that you can solve, but that you didn't even know was a problem. So I'm interviewing a lot of people. I'm also in the beginning stages of like product development and trying to analyze the data that I can gather. So on top of the electrical engineering knowledge, which I don't technically need at the moment, the other thing would be like having someone that can help me someone with like computer science or computer programming knowledge that can help me like take said like raw data and then like filter it and also be able to organize it in a very like efficient either UI interface or something else. So yeah, the electrical engineer thing is like further down the road. That's not the immediate need, but definitely something that I need right now is like someone that can sort of help me sift through the data and provide it to said person in a way that's like, oh, I like this, you know? But that would be the beginning. Like that's where I am right now. But in like 2 to 3 weeks, I'm going to be a completely different space. So it's going to be constantly changing like from now until the end of the year.
Thank you.
Oh, and I should like also add that like my idea, and this is playing directly into like what I had previously mentioned. The personal idea or venture that I'm pursuing is to create a wearable technology that helps athletes or run more efficiently and to perform like running activities more efficiently. So the reason why I can say that is because of the fact that I have done so much research at this point that the likelihood of you guys taking my idea and running with it is very slim. And if you guys do take my idea and you ran with it, I couldn't be offended because that means that I didn't do enough work on my end to make sure that I was like that much ahead of you, you know? So the way that one of the professors at MIT explained it, he was like, if you can't talk about your idea in like a coffee shop, out of fear that someone is going to take your idea, then you haven't done enough work to like be able to really make sure that nobody else is going to basically that you haven't done your due diligence. Like you need to be like 4 or 5 steps ahead of the next person. And so to be honest with you, I could care less if one of you guys decide to create a wearable technology that does the same thing. I just know that like none of you are at the stage that I am, and that I'm much more well equipped to do said thing, you know? But go for it if you want to. I accept the challenge.
I'm glad that you're open for the challenge. I don't know if any of us will want to do that, but we're running close on time. So are there any last minute questions or comments, or even from Matheus, you want to wrap up, closing statements or anything?
Yeah, Matheus, when are you accepting private shares? No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
It's gonna be a long time, buddy. Got my eye on you. The last thing that I will say, if nobody has any other questions, is like, and this is something that I like mentioned to Kira before getting on this call, which is that unfortunately, I think that from my own personal experience, which is the only one that I can speak from, I think that in like the Latinx and like Hispanic community, I don't know if we've done like a good job of like equipping like undergrads and equipping like people that are just starting off, and like explain to you guys like how things work and how you should do things. So hopefully this could be like the first step towards doing that, because like my goal is very, very selfish. I want you guys 5 years down the road to be well equipped to answer questions that other students are going to have when they're undergrads and when they're reaching out to you. Like, I want you guys to get to a point in your career where you are successful and where you are also giving back to other students that are in the same place that you guys are currently, you know? So like, some of the things that we like didn't even talk about is like, how do you evaluate whether your idea is good or not? Like we didn't talk about like, how do you even interview these customers that you're potentially trying to capture? Like how do you network effectively to create your startup and like to say, or even to like set yourself up like post graduation? Because like I said, it's like it's really difficult to get jobs right now. Like this was pre-COVID, it was already difficult. Like post-COVID is like that much harder, and especially for people that are interested in like biomechanics, like depending on what you want to do, like the likelihood of you getting a job is like very slim, unless you go into academics or if you go into research. So Kira, myself, and Nicholas are like working on trying to create these like similar sessions, but like to address like these other topics. So if you guys are willing to hear me out, and to like also help with like asking these questions, like talking about these topics, we would greatly appreciate your help, because like this is being recorded, so this can be shared to like other people, like other buddies of yours that couldn't get on this call at this moment, but that could potentially hear it in the future, and then they could potentially like even add to the questions of talking about like interviewing people, what does it mean to network, and different things like that. Because like, just to give you a small snippet and like a little bit of homework that you should do, if you haven't read about an informational interview, then that should be like the first thing that you do like when you get off this call. Because like when you graduate, like I said before, like Northeastern has already explained that 80% of people get jobs through people that they know. And I know that we're over time, but the last thing that I'll tell you is a story that a friend of mine from Google explained to me, was that when she's currently still working at Google, but she was her team were in the process of trying to hire like two different people that could potentially be well suited for a position. And one of them was a person from MIT who was very well equipped, had all the credentials. But then on the other end, there was also this person that wasn't from the same university, potentially not the same background. However, there was someone in that team that vouched for said person. And I'm not gonna ask you to reply, but like, who do you think got the job? Like, the person that got the job was a person that had someone else refer them to the company and be like, hey, I know that this person can crush it. This person is gonna do a good job. And that is more valuable than a person's degree and where they come from. So this is what I want you guys to get accustomed to doing. Like, this is uncomfortable because that means that if you interview these people, then it's uncomfortable. You're like, I don't want to talk to these guys. What am I going to say? It's like, these are all things that we can talk about in like later sessions, and that what I look forward to doing, because like, this is the stuff that gets me excited, is like equipping you guys and having you guys go off and doing these things. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be much more well equipped than a lot of people currently are. Like, I have good friends of mine that don't know a lot of the stuff that I just mentioned to you guys. And this is like little nuggets. There's a lot more that we can talk about. And hopefully this is like a start to that, you know? Any books on that to read about networking and dealing with people? I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one. I don't, none off the top of my head of this. None off the top of my head. A good place. Nothing that comes to mind right now, but I can get back to you. And we can talk about that in future sessions. Stay tuned.
All right, sounds good.
I have a recommendation, a book recommendation. How to Master the Art of Selling by Tom Hopkins. Deals not just with selling, but with how to emotionally connect with people in general, which I feel like a lot of people struggle with. So I had the pleasure of reading 2 chapters out of that book, but would recommend it so far.
Well,
What's the
hopefully
author
in
again?
this, if you look at that book, you can read more than 2 chapters and gain some insight. So I'm gonna cut it off here. I want to thank everyone for attending and listening. I hope that you found this useful and fruitful, and we'll potentially put out a new series or a new opportunity to dive deeper into these topics. And I want to thank Matheus for taking the time to talk. I know it can be nerve-wracking talking in front of a bunch of people, so I'm really happy that you had the opportunity to do this and that we planned this.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to see where you guys land in the next like 5 to 10 years. Plus, I'm not scared of you. You guys don't intimidate me. Yeah. So I'm glad to have done it. This was a great experience. Hopefully you guys learned something from me talking all sorts of things at you guys. And hopefully I can meet you guys like in person come fall, but we'll see. To be determined, you know?
Yes. Well, thank you again, and have a great night, everyone, and stay healthy and safe.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.